Hey, welcome back to Boss Economics World, the only place on the internet where we slice through the economic baloney, call out the government's economic misadventures, and serve you the spiciest financial commentary this side of Wall Street. I'm your host, the guy who's been yelling into the void about bad policy since the Fed thought negative interest rates were just a quirky idea. Today, we're diving headfirst into the latest economic dumpster fire, courtesy of the World Trade Organization's grim forecast, Donald Trump's tariff tantrum, and, of course, the government's uncanny ability to turn a recovery into a recession faster than you can say, supply chain meltdown. Grab your popcorn, folks, because this is gonna be a doozy. Let's start with the headlines, shall we? The World Trade Organization, yep, the folks who try to keep global trade from turning into a barroom brawl, just slashed its forecast for merchandise trade in 2025. We're talking a 0.2% decline in global trade volume, a number that might sound small until you realize it's almost 3 percentage points lower than where we'd be without the US-led trade war. That's right, folks, the WTO is basically saying, hey, remember when trade was supposed to rebound after the COVID chaos? Yeah, scratch that, blame Uncle Sam's tariff stick. Now, before we go any further, let's set the stage. Global trade had just started to stabilize after the pandemic threw supply chains into a blender. Ships were stuck, ports were clogged, and your Amazon Prime delivery took 6 months to arrive. But by late 2024, things were finally looking up, until Donald Trump waltzed back into the White House, promising to revive the American middle class with a shiny new weapon, tariffs. And not just any tariffs, folks, reciprocal import taxes ranging from 10% to a jaw-dropping 50%. Oh, and for China? Try duties exceeding 100%. Because nothing screams economic recovery like slapping a triple-digit tax on the world's second-largest economy, right? Now, I know what you're thinking, folks, but boss, didn't Trump say tariffs would bring jobs back, boost domestic production, and stick it to those pesky trade deficit countries? Oh, sure, that's the sales pitch. But here's the thing, promises like that are about as reliable as a politician's tax return. Let's break this down, layer by layer, and see how this tariff tornado is tearing through the global economy, leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. First things first, let's debunk the myth that tariffs are some kind of magical, foreign punishment. Tariffs are taxes, plain and simple, and guess who ends up paying them? Spoiler alert, it's not China. It's you, me, and every poor sap trying to buy a flat-screen TV at Walmart. According to a 2023 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research, during Trump's first-term trade war, U.S. consumers and businesses bore 93% of the cost of tariffs on Chinese goods. That's right, China didn't pay the bill, American wallets did. And with Trump's new tariff set to hit even harder, the Tax Foundation estimates that a 10% across-the-board tariff could cost U.S. households an additional $1,500 per year in higher prices. For lower-income families, that's not just a hit, it's a knockout punch. But wait, there's more. The WTO warns that these tariffs could spark a vicious cycle of retaliation, driving up inflation and jacking up the cost of living. Remember those difficult-to-substitute materials that WTO mentioned? Think rare earth metals, semiconductors, and other critical inputs that U.S. manufacturers rely on. China's already retaliating by restricting exports of these materials, and guess what happens next? Higher costs for everything from smartphones to electric vehicles. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York estimates that a full-blown escalation of this trade war could push U.S. inflation up by 1.3 percentage points in 2025. And folks, with inflation already hovering at 3.2% as of March 2025, per the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics data, that's not a recipe for prosperity, it's a recipe for stagflation. So, let me get this straight, folks. The government's big plan to help the middle class is to slap a tax on everything we buy, drive up inflation, and make it harder for businesses to get the stuff they need to make stuff. Brilliant. It's like trying to fix a leaky pipe by blowing up the water main. And don't even get me started on how this screws over small businesses, you know, the ones that employ half of America's workforce. But hey, at least Trump can post on X, about how he's winning the trade war, right? Now, let's zoom out to the global picture. The WTO's forecast isn't just bad news for the US, it's bad news for everyone. North American trade is getting hit the hardest, with the WTO projecting a 1.5% decline in merchandise trade volume if these reciprocal tariffs go full throttle. Meanwhile, Asia and Europe are scraping by with modest growth, but don't kid yourself, nobody's immune. The ripple effects of this trade war are already shaking up global supply chains, and the WTO warns of significant trade diversion. Translation: Chinese exporters, locked out of the U.S. market, are flooding third markets with cheap goods, sparking fears of increased competition and price wars. Just ask Australia, where local manufacturers are already crying foul over a 15% surge in Chinese steel imports since January 2025, per the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And here's the kicker, services trade, which was supposed to be the bright spot in this economic gloom, is taking a hit too. The WTO now sees commercial services growing by just 4% in 2025, down from 6.8% in 2024. That's everything from software development to tourism, folks, industries that employ millions of people worldwide. In the US alone, the services sector accounts for 80% of GDP, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So, when services trade slows, you're not just losing export dollars, you're losing jobs. The International Monetary Fund estimates that a sustained US-China trade war could shave 0.6% off global GDP by 2026, translating to millions of job losses worldwide. And here in the US, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce warns that Trump's tariffs could put 1.2 million American jobs at risk, especially in manufacturing and agriculture. Oh, but don't worry, folks, Trump says tariffs will bring jobs back. Sure, maybe if you're in a steel mill in Pennsylvania. But for the rest of us, farmers, truckers, retail workers, tech engineers, it's a one-way ticket to the unemployment line. And let's not forget the irony here, the guy who campaigned on fixing trade deficits is actually making them worse. The U.S. trade deficit with China ballooned by 8% in the first quarter of 2025, per the U.S. Census Bureau, because tariffs don't fix structural issues, they just make everything more expensive. It's like trying to lose weight by eating more donuts. Genius. Now, let's talk about the real villain here, government mismanagement. Look, I get it, tariffs sound like a tough guy move, a way to stick it to China and protect American workers. But the reality is, this isn't strategy, it's chaos. The Trump administration's tariff policy is a textbook example of short-term political posturing trumping, pun intended, long-term economic sense. The WTO itself says that, over the medium to long term, higher import tariffs generally have an overall net negative effect on economic activity and trade. And yet, here we are, doubling down on a policy that's already proven to be a dud. Remember the first Trump trade war? A 2023 report by the Federal Reserve found that U.S. manufacturing output actually declined by 1.1% during the tariff-heavy years of 2018 to 2019, while consumer prices rose and agricultural exports tanked. But it's not just Trump, let's not let the rest of the government off the hook. Where's Congress in all this? Oh, right, too busy bickering over budget bills to pass any meaningful trade legislation. And the Federal Reserve? They're stuck in a no-win situation, trying to fight tariff-driven inflation without tanking the economy. Just last month, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell warned that trade policy uncertainty is a significant headwind for monetary policy, according to the March 2025 FOMC minutes. Translation: the Fed can't fix what the government keeps breaking. Folks, this is what happens when you let politicians play economist. They slap on tariffs like a drunk guy throwing darts at a bar, with zero regard for the collateral damage. And who pays the price? You do. Your small business does. Your 401k does. Meanwhile, the government's out here patting itself on the back, saying, look, we raised $50 billion in tariff revenue. Yeah, great, but at what cost? According to the Congressional Budget Office, every dollar of tariff revenue costs the U.S. economy $1.30 in lost output. It's like burning your house down to stay warm. Absolute clown show. So, where does this leave us? If the WTO's forecasts hold, we're staring down the barrel of a global trade contraction, a U.S. economy teetering on the edge of recession, and a government that's too busy flexing to fix anything. The latest data from the Conference Board shows that consumer confidence in the U.S. dropped to 95.3 in April 2025, the lowest since mid-2022, as fears of inflation and job losses mount. Meanwhile, the ISM Manufacturing Index, a key gauge of industrial activity, fell to 47.8 in March 2025, below the 50 threshold that signals contraction. And let's not forget the stock market, which has been on a roller coaster ride since Trump's tariff announcement, with the S&P 500 down 6% year-to-date as of April 2025, per Yahoo Finance. But hey, at least we've got bilateral negotiations to save the day, right? Just this week, a delegation from Japan is at the White House, trying to talk Trump down from his 50% tariff ledge. Good luck with that, folks. Trump's not exactly known for backing down from a fight, even when it's a fight he's losing. And if these negotiations fail, the WTO warns that a full-blown tariff escalation could push global trade into a 1.5% decline in 2025, a hit that would make the COVID-era disruptions look like a walk in the park. Folks, this is how you get a recession. Step 1, tank global trade with tariffs. Step 2, drive up inflation and kill consumer confidence. Step 3, sit back and watch as businesses lay off workers, supply chains collapse, and the stock market tanks. And Step 4. Blame China, of course. It's the perfect government playbook: create a crisis, then point fingers. Meanwhile, the rest of us are left picking up the pieces. But hey, at least we'll have plenty of time to watch Boss Economics World while we're stuck in the unemployment line, right? So, what's the takeaway, folks? First, don't buy the hype. Tariffs aren't winning, they're losing, big time. Second, hold your government accountable. Write to your congressperson, call out bad policy on social media, and for the love of all that is holy, don't let politicians convince you that economic self-sabotage is patriotism. And third, protect yourself. If you're an investor, diversify your portfolio. Gold and bonds are looking pretty good right now, with the SPDR Gold Shares ETF up 12% year-to-date, per Bloomberg. If you're a business owner, start looking for domestic suppliers, because relying on global supply chains in this tariff tornado is a recipe for disaster. And if you're just a regular Joe or Jane trying to make ends meet, brace yourself, because the government's economic mismanagement is about to hit your wallet harder than a freight train. That's all for today, folks. If you liked this spicy economic takedown, smash that like button, subscribe to Boss Economics World, and share this video with every friend, family member, and coworker who's tired of government incompetence tanking our economy. And remember, while the politicians are busy playing tariff roulette, we're here to call it like it is, no holds barred. Until next time, keep your wallets tight and your skepticism sharp. This is Boss Economics World, signing off.